Hello everyone, it's me Uncle John. Today I am going to read S4 4087 10 in a Tent by Danny Katz. Chapter 1, The Tent. Honey was in the tent, and Julian was in the tent, and Nick was in the tent, and Millie and Molly were also in the tent, and Lulu and Finny and Mr. Murch and Mrs. Murch and Bear the dog, 10 in a tent, all squished in time. It was impossible to sleep like this, all bunched up in a little tent, and Bear the dog was the biggest dog in the whole universe. He took up most of the space. So everyone else had to squeeze into a teeny corner. If you were passing by outside, it would look kind of funny because you could see everyone's faces pushed up against the tent fabric. This was turning out to be the worst vacation ever. The March family had gone on some pretty bad vacations, like the one when the car broke down and they had to call a tow truck to tow it away, or the one when Mrs. Murch locked herself in the hotel room. They had to call the fire department to come and get her out on a ladder. Or the one where Julian threw up on the airplane. It wouldn't have been so bad if he hadn't been sitting in the cockpit next to the pilot at the time. But this vacation was a total disaster. And it was all Mr. Murch's fault. You see, Mr. Murch wanted to take the family on a camping trip, but they had never gone camping before. They didn't even have a tent, so Mr. Murch went to buy one. He looked at lots of different tents, big fancy tents with high roofs, super duper tents with a zip-up window, mega modern tents with a soft padded floors. But all these tents were a little too expensive, so he bought a cheap tent instead. He bought a $20 kids tent with a low roof and a wobbly pole and a flapping door. 10 in a tent, no one can move. Chapter 2, The Smells. Elbows were poking into backs, knees were wedged into belly, the feet were sticking into faces. Nick's big smelly feet was stuck right in Honey's nose, and she couldn't breathe at all. Honey tried turning her head in the other direction, but she came face to face with Bear the dog. He was dribbling in his sleep, so she turned back to Nick's smelly feet. Nick's feet weren't the only smelly things in the tent. There was the musty smell of old sleeping bag that hadn't been used for years. There was the burned smell of toast that Mrs. Murch tried to cook for dinner. And there was the very bad smell of rotting garbage. Rotten, stinky, yucky, disgusting, smelly garbage. That was because Mr. Murch had set up the tent right next to a trash can. Everyone told him not to do it. They said, "Don't set the tent up here. It's next to a trash can." Mr. Murch said, "Exactly. Now we won't have to walk very far to get rid of our trash." And he was right. They didn't have to walk far at all. They didn't even have to walk. They could just stick their hands out of the tent window and slam dunk the trash right into the can. Mr. Murch said, "Isn't this great, kids? We have our own personal garbage can." But he was wrong about that. It turned out to be the main trash can for the whole campsite where 400 other campers were staying too. Cheap packets were overflowing onto the ground like lava. Plastic bottles were lying around the tent like a moat. No nappy was hooked onto the tent pole. No one could leave the tent at night because no one was brave enough to cross the rotting fruit obstacle course right outside the door. 10 in a tent, no one can breathe. Chapter 3, The Noises. Then there were all the noises. Molly and Millie wouldn't stop crying all night. They were making wah, wah, wah kind of noise. And Nick was listening to hip-hop music on his Discman, made a slow boom, boom, boom kind of noise, and the guy sleeping in the tent Next door was snoring very loudly. He made a funny kind of noise. It was so loud that Julian actually peeked outside the window to make sure it wasn't a helicopter landing on top of him. There were scary sounds as well, like the sound of animals creeping in the bushes, the sound of trees squeaking in the breeze, the sound of a footstep drawing closer and closer. Ski, ski, dum. It was just some person walking past the tent, but Lulu was so frightened. She buried her head inside a sleeping bag and tried to sleep like that. A few seconds later, she came back out again because she had discovered a family of moths living in there. 10 in a tent, and a family of moths. Now there was a strange hissing noise in the tent. Hiss! Honey couldn't work out what it was. She thought it might be a snake or a bug or something, but it wasn't any of those things. The noise was coming from the inflatable mattress. There was a little hole in the inflatable mattress. And all the air was coming out. The inflatable mattress didn't always have a hole in it. It only had a hole in it because Aunt Finny decided to wear high heels to bed. Hiss! Pretty soon all the air had come out of the mattress, and then it wasn't an inflatable mattress anymore. It was just a hard, flat sheet of rubber with a huge bulge in the middle. The big bulge was a rock. It was a hard bit of rock that was sticking up underneath the tent. 10 in a tent on a hard bit of rock. Chapter 4, the wind. There was still one more noise to come. Whoosh! Made everyone sit up. It was the sound of the wind. Big blasts of air were hitting the side of the tent. This was because Mr. Birchie had set up the tent in a windy place. He had set up the tent right on the beach where there was no shelter. Honey knew this was going to be a problem. She had even told her father when he was setting up the tent. She said, "Dad, don't you think we should pitch the tent somewhere a little more sheltered?" Mr. Murchie said, "But then we don't have these great ocean views." Honey said, "What ocean views?" And Mr. Murchie said, "They're just behind the trash can." Honey looked around the trash can. Oh, those ocean views. But now in the middle of the night, the wind was becoming wilder and wilder. The door was flipping and flapping, and bits of rope were lashing the sides. The tent actually started lifting off the ground. It started to drag along the sand. So when Mr. Birchie began to wonder maybe there was a reason for those tent pegs that came with the tent. 10 in a tent, headed for trouble. This was an emergency. Everybody sprang into action. When he tried to get her leg out from under Aunt Finny, but Aunt Finny couldn't move until she got her elbow out from under Lulu, and Lulu couldn't move until she got her knee out from under Mrs. Murchie's back. And Mrs. Murchie couldn't move until she got her hair out from under Bear the dog. Then Mr. Birchie told all the kids to stay inside the tent while the grown-ups went outside to stop the tent from blowing away. So Mr. Murch, Mrs. Murch, and Finny all stepped out of the tent. It was a big mistake. You see, grown-ups are very heavy. As soon as they stepped out of the tent, it became much lighter and started lifting even higher into the air. But it didn't blow away because Bear the dog was still in it. He was the biggest dog in the whole universe. So everything was okay. Everything was just fine. Until Bear the dog decided to follow the grown-up. "No, no, no, no!" shouted Honey. Bear the dog stepped out of the tent in a single moment. The tent took off with all the kids inside. Mr. Birchie chased it down the beach. He dived and grabbed whatever he could. Rip! He grabbed the aluminum tent pole and held onto it, but the tent was just a $20 Keys tent from the camping store. The aluminum pole was actually made of plastic. The pole bent in half. Mr. Birchie rolled upside down, and then rip! That was the sound of a pajama pants ripping. Mr. Murchie's pajama pants. They were his favorite pair, the old ones with the blue and white stripe, and they ripped right down the back. Mrs. Birch was yelling, And Finney was laughing, and the kid in the tent was screaming. Everyone was making so much noise that all the campers from across the campsite came out to see what was happening. Whole family came out to have a look. The lady from across the way came out to see, and the sorting guy from next door came to look too. They all stood and stared at Mr. Birch, lying there with the rip in his pajama pants. He was holding on to the pole of the $20 keys tent with all the keys inside. Chapter 5. The pajama pants. Then Mr. Birch did something really stupid. It was something even more stupid than all the other stupid things he had done in this camping trip. Didn't want all these people looking at the rip in the back of his pajama pants. So he covered the rip up with his hands. The same hands that were supposed to be holding on to the tent pole. As soon as he let go of the tent pole, the tent blew away in the wind. It blew away like a big baggy kite, with Honey and Julian and Lulu and Nick and Molly Emily inside. The tent blew across the beach out toward the sea, 6 in a tent, blowing away. Honey looked out the tent window. She could see the beach down below, and she had to think fast. She said, "Okay, everyone, we're going to have to jump. We should each grab something important." So Honey grabbed Millie, and Julian grabbed Molly, and Nick grabbed his CD player, and Lulu stuck a finger in the mouse. They jumped out of the tent and landed on the soft beach sand. Off went the little kid's tent with a hole in the roof. Wobbly pole and the flapping door off into the sky, off into the distance, flipping away forever, and everyone stood on the beach watching it go. 10 of them, and no tent. Honey sat down on the sand with her dad. She told him that this vacation was definitely the worst vacation ever. She said that they should find a more comfortable place to spend the rest of the night. So all of them jumped into the car, drove to a nice hotel called the Bella Vista Motor Inn. It had color TV, air conditioning, hot shower, 5 separate rooms. They stayed there for the rest of the vacation. It turned out to be a pretty good camping trip after all. The end.